Ally MacGraw reveals the horrors of being married to Steve McQueen. In the glittering Hollywood of the 1970s, they were the ultimate power couple. She was the elegant beauty who had just earned an Oscar nomination and worldwide fame for Love Story. He was the rebellious king of cool, whose dangerous charm made him the highest-paid actor in the world. When Ally MacGraw and Steve McQueen fell in love on the set of The Getaway in 1972, it seemed like the perfect union of Hollywood royalty. What the public didn't see was the darkness behind closed doors, the controlling behavior that isolated her from friends and family, the jealousy that monitored her every move, the addiction to danger that kept her in constant fear, and the infidelity that ultimately destroyed what remained of their relationship. I was beautiful and adored, but treated like property, MacGraw would later reveal in a rare moment of candor about the marriage that derailed her promising career and nearly destroyed her sense of self. For decades, MacGraw remained largely silent about the painful details of her life with McQueen. While he was mythologized after his early death from cancer in 1980, she retreated from Hollywood, rebuilding her life far from the spotlight that once defined her. Now, in her mid-80s, MacGraw has finally begun sharing the truth about what happened during those tumultuous years, a cautionary tale of how even the most independent, successful women could lose themselves entirely to controlling relationships in an era when such behavior was not just tolerated, but often romanticized. Tonight, we reveal the shocking reality behind one of Hollywood's most notoriously troubled marriages, the story of a woman who gave up everything for love, only to discover she had surrendered herself to someone who valued possession more than partnership.
Steve fell apart, and the public's version of my fairy tale kind of went into crisis.
1. He made her quit acting. The career sacrificed for love. When Ally MacGraw and Steve McQueen began their affair on the set of The Getaway, she was at the absolute pinnacle of her career. Her performance in Love Story had earned her an Academy Award nomination, a Golden Globe win, and the adoration of millions. At 33, she had become one of Hollywood's most bankable stars, with directors and producers eager to work with the woman whose vulnerable intensity had captivated audiences worldwide. Within months of marrying McQueen, that promising career effectively ended. Though never explicitly stated in public during their marriage, MacGraw has since revealed that McQueen gave her an ultimatum, him or her career. "I gave it all up for him, and he didn't respect it," MacGraw admitted decades later. "It was expected that I would be Mrs. Steve McQueen, period. Not Ally MacGraw, actress. Just his wife, available whenever he wanted me to be." The decision stunned Hollywood insiders, who couldn't understand why a star at her peak would suddenly disappear from the industry. Paramount Pictures, which had MacGraw under contract, reportedly offered her several major roles that she turned down at McQueen's insistence. There was a script Paramount developed specifically for her that would have been perfect, revealed a former studio executive who worked closely with MacGraw before her marriage. When she turned it down without even reading it, we knew something had changed dramatically in her life. It wasn't just taking a break. She was systematically dismantling her own career. What made McQueen's demand particularly troubling was the double standard it revealed. While insisting that his wife abandon her professional ambitions, McQueen continued making films at a prolific pace throughout their marriage. His career remained his top priority, even as he denied MacGraw the same opportunity. "Steve couldn't handle her success," explained a friend who knew the couple during their marriage. "He needed to be the star, not just in Hollywood, but in their relationship. Having a wife who received as much attention and acclaim as he did threatened his sense of masculinity." For MacGraw, raised in an era when women were still expected to prioritize their husbands' needs above their own, the sacrifice initially seemed romantic rather than controlling. She later described it as believing she was choosing love over career, only to realize too late that genuine love wouldn't have demanded such a choice. "I thought I was making a romantic sacrifice," she told an interviewer in her 80s. "It took me years to understand that someone who truly loved me would have wanted me to flourish, not disappear." By the time their marriage ended in 1978, MacGraw had spent 5 critical years absent from Hollywood. When she attempted to return, the landscape had changed. Roles for women in their late 30s were scarce, and her momentum had been lost. What should have been the most productive period of her acting career had been surrendered to a relationship that ultimately left her with neither the marriage nor the career she had sacrificed for it.
It was just, it's two things. It was, why can't you read my mind? about what I'd like and what I wouldn't like.
Yeah.
Like, how about speaking English?
2. Extreme control and jealousy, living under surveillance. Beyond forcing her professional retreat, McQueen established a system of control and surveillance over MacGraw's daily life that extended to her appearance, social interactions, and even her past. His jealousy manifested in ways both overt and subtle, creating an atmosphere where MacGraw lived in constant awareness of his potential reaction to her every move. McQueen was possessive and paranoid, especially about other men, revealed a close friend of MacGraw from that period. He would question her about every male interaction, no matter how innocent. A waiter, a gardener, a director she'd worked with years earlier, any man became a potential threat in his mind. According to multiple sources, McQueen monitored MacGraw's phone calls, questioned her about conversations, and sometimes appeared unexpectedly at places where she was meeting friends, ostensibly to surprise her, but clearly to check who she was with. He discouraged her from maintaining close friendships, particularly with people from her pre-McQueen life who might influence her. His control extended to her appearance in particularly troubling ways. Despite MacGraw's renowned natural beauty, the very quality that had helped make her famous, McQueen objected to her wearing makeup, styling her hair, or dressing in ways that might attract attention. "I was beautiful and adored, but treated like property," MacGraw later reflected. "The irony was that he had fallen in love with me partly because of how I looked on screen, then immediately wanted to ensure no one else could appreciate that same beauty." Perhaps most disturbing was McQueen's apparent determination to erase MacGraw's past. He reportedly disliked hearing about her previous marriage to film producer Robert Evans, her early modeling career, or any of her achievements before they met. The message was clear. Her life began with him, and acknowledgement of her independent past threatened his control of her present. Friends observed the transformation in MacGraw's behavior during the marriage, how she became hesitant to speak freely, constantly checking McQueen's expression for signs of disapproval, and developing nervous habits that reflected her perpetual state of anxiety. "She became a different person around him," noted a makeup artist who had worked with MacGraw before her marriage and encountered her again at a social function during her time with McQueen. "The confident, outspoken woman I knew had been replaced by someone who seemed to be constantly gauging her words, monitoring her behavior. She looked physically the same, but her spirit seemed diminished." For MacGraw, this control initially masqueraded as passionate protection. In the context of the 1970s, when romantic jealousy was often portrayed in media as a sign of love rather than control, McQueen's behavior could be misinterpreted as intense devotion rather than recognized as the emotional abuse it represented. "At first I thought his jealousy meant he treasured me," MacGraw admitted years later. "It took me too long to realize that treasure is something you lock away and possess, not something you respect and allow to flourish."
When my marriage to Steve fell apart and the public's version of my fairy tale kind of went into crisis.
3. He was addicted to chaos, living on the edge. While demanding complete control over MacGraw's behavior, McQueen himself lived a life defined by its lack of boundaries. His addiction to danger, physical, emotional, and chemical, created an environment where MacGraw existed in a constant state of anxiety, never knowing which version of her husband she would encounter from one day to the next. McQueen's lifestyle, drugs, alcohol, motorcycles, bar fights, summarized a stuntman who worked with the actor during this period. He needed adrenaline like most people need oxygen. There was no off switch, no moment when he could just be at peace. This chaos extended beyond recreational risk-taking into substance abuse that affected his mood and behavior unpredictably. Though McQueen maintained the physical discipline required for his action roles, he counterbalanced this with excessive drinking and drug use that created wildly fluctuating emotional states. Allie later described her life as being in constant emotional danger, revealed a close friend who maintained contact with MacGraw throughout her marriage. She never knew if she'd come home to find him loving and attentive or angry and accusatory. The unpredictability was its own form of control, keeping her perpetually off balance and trying to anticipate his needs. Perhaps most troubling was McQueen's seeming addiction to conflict itself. Friends reported witnessing him deliberately provoke arguments in public settings, sometimes creating scenes at restaurants or parties that left MacGraw humiliated and attempting to smooth over situations he had intentionally disrupted. He thrived on adrenaline. She survived on silence, observed a director who knew them socially. You'd watch her at events, seeing her tense up when he'd start picking fights or making provocative comments. She became expert at diplomatic intervention, trying to prevent his confrontations from escalating. This chaos had physical manifestations in their home life as well. McQueen's passion for motorcycles and fast cars meant their household was often filled with mechanical projects, racing friends, and the constant possibility of injury. While McQueen found these activities exhilarating, for MacGraw they represented another source of ongoing stress. Friends said she was nervous, exhausted, and walking on eggshells, noted a journalist who interviewed the couple during their marriage. Even in professional settings, you could see her vigilance, watching him, anticipating problems, ready to intervene if his behavior threatened to cross lines. The contrast between McQueen's demand for freedom and his restriction of MacGraw's independence created a fundamentally unbalanced relationship. While he could disappear for days on motorcycle trips with friends, she was expected to be available whenever he returned, with no questions asked about his activities during his absence. It was like living with a tornado, MacGraw later described. Exciting at first, but eventually you realize that even when the storm isn't actively destroying things, you're still living in constant awareness that it could form again at any moment. That level of vigilance exhausts you down to your soul.
What do I remember most about my childhood? Peanut butter and jelly sandwiches, if you want to know. That's great. I come from a broken family, and you went through probably, 50...
4. He cheated constantly, the ultimate hypocrisy. While subjecting MacGraw to intense scrutiny regarding any male interaction, McQueen himself maintained sexual relationships with multiple women throughout their marriage, a double standard that represented perhaps the most painful aspect of their relationship. He openly slept with other women, confirmed a production assistant who worked on several of McQueen's films during his marriage to MacGraw. It wasn't even particularly discreet. Crew members knew, other actors knew. The only person expected to pretend it wasn't happening was Allie. This infidelity wasn't limited to brief encounters while filming on location. According to multiple sources, McQueen maintained ongoing relationships with several women, sometimes even in locations near the home he shared with MacGraw. Allie knew, but stayed loyal at first, said a friend who remained close to MacGraw after the divorce. She adopted this philosophy of looking the other way, telling herself it was just physical and didn't threaten their real relationship. But eventually, the humiliation became too much to bear. The hypocrisy was particularly cutting given McQueen's extreme jealousy regarding MacGraw's behavior. While she couldn't speak to a male colleague without interrogation, he felt entitled to pursue relationships with other women openly enough that industry gossip regularly made its way back to her. The double standard was breathtaking, noted a columnist who covered Hollywood during that era. If Ali had behaved with even a fraction of the freedom he claimed for himself, the marriage would have ended instantly. But she was expected to accept his infidelities as part of being married to Steve McQueen. For MacGraw, this aspect of their marriage created perhaps the deepest wound, the recognition that the control he exerted over her wasn't about love or even genuine jealousy, but about ownership and dominance. If his restrictions on her behavior had stemmed from authentic fear of losing her, his own actions would have reflected similar commitment. When she finally left, she said, "I realized I'd given myself away completely and gotten nothing in return," revealed a confidant who supported MacGraw during the divorce. That was the moment the spell broke, understanding that all her sacrifices had been met not just with a lack of appreciation, but with fundamental disrespect. The end came after MacGraw discovered evidence of a particularly significant betrayal, a relationship McQueen had been conducting with a much younger woman for an extended period. Though she had overlooked many infidelities, this one finally broke her willingness to maintain the unequal terms of their marriage. There's a difference between turning a blind eye to occasional indiscretions and accepting that your entire relationship is based on a lie, MacGraw later explained. "I finally recognized that I was the only one actually committed to our marriage. Once you see that clearly, continuing becomes a form of self-betrayal."
What I was doing, I was cast because I'd been in a very successful picture and the studio wanted the girl from Love Story.
5. She lost herself and had to rebuild, the long recovery. When MacGraw finally left McQueen in 1978, she wasn't just leaving a marriage, she was attempting to reclaim an identity that had been systematically dismantled over 5 critical years. The process of rebuilding would prove far more challenging and time-consuming than the swift erasure of self she had experienced. After the divorce, Ali disappeared from Hollywood, noted an entertainment journalist who had covered MacGraw's career. It wasn't just about avoiding awkward encounters or tabloid attention. She genuinely needed to rediscover who she was, apart from being Steve McQueen's wife, a role that had completely consumed her. MacGraw's path to recovery began with physical retreat. She moved to New Mexico, far from Hollywood's spotlight, and immersed herself in practices that helped her reconnect with her authentic self after years of suppressing her own needs and identity. She turned to yoga, meditation, and solitude, revealed a friend who visited MacGraw during this period. These weren't trendy lifestyle choices for her. They were survival mechanisms. She needed disciplines that would help her recognize and honor her own voice after years of silencing it. The professional consequences of her marriage remained stark. The 5-year absence from filmmaking had coincided exactly with what should have been the peak of her acting career. While contemporary actresses might take extended breaks and return to find meaningful roles, the Hollywood of the late 1970s and early 1980s had little interest in women approaching 40 who had stepped away from the spotlight. It took decades to reclaim her voice, observed a director who had worked with MacGraw before her marriage. The tragic timing can't be overstated. She surrendered her career at precisely the moment it had reached its greatest potential. By the time she was emotionally ready to return, the industry had largely moved on. MacGraw did eventually act again, most notably in the television miniseries The Winds of War, and later in the series Dynasty. But these roles represented a fraction of what her career trajectory had promised before her marriage to McQueen. The Oscar-nominated film actress had been replaced by an occasional television performer, her potential never fully realized. Perhaps most poignantly, MacGraw has acknowledged the complexity of her feelings toward McQueen, even decades after their divorce and his death. Like many survivors of controlling relationships, her emotional reality includes both recognition of the harm done and persistent feelings of attachment to the person who caused it. At 85, she told interviewers, "I loved him, but I was dying inside," reported a journalist who conducted one of MacGraw's rare in-depth interviews about the marriage. That simultaneous acknowledgement of genuine love and devastating harm reflects the complicated truth of many abusive relationships. They aren't maintained solely through fear, but through complex emotional bonds that make leaving far harder than outsiders might imagine. MacGraw's journey from celebrated actress to controlled wife to independent survivor offers a window into how completely a controlling relationship can subvert even a seemingly strong woman's sense of self. Her story resonates not just as Hollywood history, but as a cautionary tale about relationships where love becomes a mechanism for control rather than growth. The saddest part wasn't losing my career, MacGraw reflected in a rare moment of candor during a 2021 interview. It was losing myself so completely that I didn't even recognize the sacrifice as it was happening. By the time I understood what I'd given up, years of my life and potential had already disappeared, time I could never get back. The legacy of survival, what Ali's story teaches us. Ali MacGraw's experience with Steve McQueen represents more than just another troubled Hollywood marriage. It stands as a powerful case study in how charismatic control can dismantle a successful woman's identity, career, and independence, and how the journey to reclaim oneself afterward can take far longer than the process of losing oneself. What makes MacGraw's story particularly significant is how it challenges the romanticized narratives that often surround both McQueen and the era itself. While McQueen has been mythologized after his early death as the quintessential masculine rebel, MacGraw's revelations expose the darker reality of how that rebellious spirit manifested in their private life, not as freedom for both partners, but as freedom for him and restriction for her. The 1970s represented a contradictory period for women's independence. While the women's movement was gaining momentum in society at large, Hollywood relationships often still operated under significantly more traditional power dynamics. MacGraw's willingness to sacrifice her career for marriage reflected cultural expectations that remained strong despite the era's surface-level progress toward equality. Perhaps most valuable is MacGraw's late-in-life willingness to speak honestly about experiences she kept private for decades. By sharing the reality behind what appeared to be a glamorous celebrity marriage, she offers important insights about the warning signs of controlling relationships, insights that transcend both her specific situation and the era in which it occurred. What I learned too late, MacGraw reflected in a recent interview, is that love doesn't diminish you, it expands who you are. If a relationship requires you to become smaller, less successful, less connected to others, or less expressive, that's not love. That's control wearing love's costume. Her journey also highlights the lengthy process of recovery from controlling relationships. MacGraw's retreat from Hollywood wasn't just about career disruption, but about the necessary work of psychological healing and identity reconstruction. The practices she embraced, yoga, meditation, and intentional solitude, provided tools for reconnecting with a self that had been systematically suppressed. Now, in her mid-80s, MacGraw has achieved something that once seemed impossible: the ability to acknowledge both her love for McQueen and the damage their relationship caused. This nuanced perspective reflects emotional maturity rather than contradiction, recognition that human relationships can simultaneously contain genuine affection and harmful dynamics. People want these stories to be simple. He was a monster, or she was a willing participant who shouldn't complain now, noted a therapist specializing in recovery from controlling relationships. MacGraw's willingness to hold the complexity that she loved him and his behavior was destructive offers a much more authentic understanding of how these relationships actually function. For younger generations encountering MacGraw's story, her experience provides valuable warning signs about relationships that begin with intensity but gradually strip away independence under the guise of passion or protection. The very behaviors that might be misinterpreted as romantic devotion, jealousy, wanting someone all to yourself, prioritizing the relationship above all else, revealed their true nature as control mechanisms over time. I don't regret loving him, MacGraw has said, but I regret losing myself. If sharing that helps even one young woman recognize the difference between passionate love and controlling behavior, then breaking my silence will have been worth it.